Hi, thanks for your purchase of Sassy Sam sourdough starter. I'm Sam and I'm going to walk you through how to get this little bag of goodies going. First of all, you need a couple of things. A container for your starter, preferably plastic or glass. Sourdough does not like metal. Some of the metal components can have an acid reaction and slow the growth of your starter. Also, metal is a heat conductor, particularly if your kitchen has granite or stone countertops. It will then cool it and not provide a warm enough environment for your starter to get going. You also need water. The tap water where I live is really good, so I use just tap water. If you live in an environment with a lot of iron in your water, you may want to use distilled. Next, you need the little 1.5 ounce bag of goodies that arrive to you by mail. The size chunks might vary depending on how aggressive your postal person was. It might even be pulverized. And actually, the smaller the pieces, the more quickly it's going to rehydrate. The water temperature should be between 80 and 90 degrees. You don't want it too hot to kill off the starter, but you want it to be warm enough to provide some growth for the environment. Also, be mindful that the utensils you use should not have metal in, so preferably a wood or plastic stirring utensil when you add the water. We're just going to dump the water in, give it a little stir, and then this is going to sit for 2 to 3 hours. If you do live in a high elevation, the water will evaporate more quickly. Depending on what season it is, might also be a little bit quicker, so I would keep an eye on it and make sure that the pieces stay completely submerged. We're going to come back to this in a couple of hours and take the next step. This has been sitting for approximately an hour and a half, starting to disintegrate. It's now been resting for approximately 4 hours, rehydrating, and you can see its consistency is pretty liquidy. There are still some tiny chunks. We're now going to feed it and then let it rest for approximately 10 to 12 hours. So we're going to give it something to eat now that it's waking back up. I use organic bread flour. I get it at Costco. You can use any flour you would like. If you want to continue the product to be fully organic, whatever flour you select, have that be organic. But really you can do anything. Wheat flour is a little bit more fibrous, so it might take a couple of more tablespoons of water to get this consistency than compared to a white flour. You can use barley, whole wheat, you can do really any kind of flour. That contains a gluten. You will not get this consistency in the type of bread that you see for artisan bread if you use something like almond flour or coconut flour. I added 1/4 cup of flour and now 1/4 cup of the tempered water, 80 to 90 degrees. And just stirring it with a plastic utensil. You'll notice chunks of flour, and you're not going to get them all out. As the starter comes back to life, it's going to absorb the moisture from the flour. So if you are in an elevation, drier climate, or a really hot temperature with low humidity, you might need to add more water to this. For now, it's going to sit, and it's kind of going to be the consistency of gravy as it absorbs. This is going to sit now for the next 10 to 12 hours. You can let it sit overnight. If you're going to leave it for more than 12 hours, put a little cover on it, not tight. It does need that air to breathe. The consistency ended up a little bit more watery than I expected, so I'm going to put a touch more flour in. This would be approximately 2 to 4 tablespoons. There we go. Now it's got the more gravy-like consistency, and the chunks of flour that are in there over the course of the next 10 to 12 hours are going to be, and in 10 to 12 hours, we'll have a nice bubbly starter. If your environment, room temperature is lower than 70 degrees, it may take a little bit longer. If it is warmer, it might be a shorter period of time. The environment right here is 70 degrees, and I'm gonna let it rest, and I'll be back in about 10 hours. Welcome back. We are a little more than 12 hours into the starter after having it rested, and it has started to bubble and is taking on a nice appearance. It is kind of, as gross as this is, almost a snotty texture. There's some elasticity starting to form in the starter. This is going to need another day to rejuvenate before we can divide it and bake off our first loaf. The starter today, I'm going to move into a bigger container to give it a little bit more airspace and leave it at room temperature. It is still a little bit runnier than we'd like to see it. Again, we want to have almost an elasticy pull with the starter when it's ready to bake. I'm going to dump it into a bowl today. A plastic bowl, because even the components of some stainless steel, unless it's certified, have aluminum in, and the acid that reacts to aluminum and the copper will not allow the starter to grow. Starter overall is really resilient. Sourdough baking is a lot easier than I think people hear or have an impression of, because you have to feed it and take care of it. In fact, today I read that there's a sourdough bed and breakfast hotel that you can drop your sourdough off in Sweden, so somebody will feed it and nurture it while you're away on vacation. Through the course of some of the other videos, you'll learn how resilient it is and some things that you can do to make sure that it's still ready for you when you come home from vacation. Today we're going to mix in another cup of flour, because we're going to get at least 2 cups of the starter going before we bake it off, so we have some in reserve to save in the refrigerator or on the counter to grow until we're ready to bake the next loaf. That was a cup of flour, and I'm going to put in a little less than a cup of water this time. I'm looking for a pretty specific consistency. If you are new to baking bread, or maybe haven't been as successful as you would like in the past, baking bread is more about consistency and the touch and the feel than it is about the actual recipe. We're going to mix the flour in. Doesn't have to have all of the chunks evaporated, because this is going to continue to absorb as it sits. The flour will absorb the water. Now this starter is nice and fed. Our consistency today is more like pudding. It's got a lot of flour it can work with. I guess runny pudding. Maybe more like oatmeal is a better description. So kind of the consistency of oatmeal. And we are just going to settle this in, and it can sit for 24 plus hours. You can look at it intermittently if you want to take a peek. As time goes on through the next day, it's going to take on that nice sourdough smell. Here in Sassy Sam's test kitchen, we have multiple starters going at different times. And I am just going to show you this one. There's a little bit of water that's separated on top, and that's absolutely normal for your starter. This one has been going for some time, and it does have the nice elasticity. If you can kind of see, it pulls with it, kind of an elasticness in the starter. The water on top does mean that it has eaten the flour in it, so I don't plan on baking this right now. I am going to mix in a couple of more tablespoons of flour, because I don't plan on doing that until later today. The consistency was as such that it does not need more water right now. I'm just going to give it a little bit of food, and then I can set it off to the side. And later tonight, when I'm ready to bake, it will be ready. Welcome back. It's been a day, and our next step is to divide the starter, put some of it either on the counter and feed it again, or store it in the refrigerator. So the starter is going. We've got nice little bubble action here, and it has a consistency now of a little bit more sliminess, I guess I can say, but the starter is active and ready to bake off the first loaf. I am going to save part of this as reserve. The first loaf that you bake is going to take a little bit more finesse, and it may not have the consistency of the crust on the outside as you become accustomed to your elevation, your humidity, and the items that you're using for baking. Also, the type of flour, the type of water can add some variability. So in the following videos, we'll troubleshoot that. For right now, that ends the making of the starter. This one I'm going to put into the refrigerator, and in a couple of days when I'm ready to bake another loaf, I will pull this out, feed it, and we'll do a video about that as well. So our starter is active, and watch one of the next videos for whatever kind of sourdough you want to make. If you already have a recipe going, you can use, I would suggest using a little bit more starter the first time around. This is still waking up and it does not yet have the pungent sourdough smell. You're going to have to cycle through a few of the feedings and bakings in order for that to happen. So we are ready to go with this starter. Watch the next video on baking a standard sourdough loaf.